Hello, and welcome to Stories from India, a podcast where we talk about myths, legends, and folk tales from India. Now, as you probably know, India is a very diverse country. There are dozens of distinct cultures, each with their own brand of mythology and in their own language. I'm your host, Narad Muni, and I'm a mythological character myself. I personally appear in many of these stories, and I play an important role in some. I was given the gift of eternal life and knowledge of the past, the present, and the future. And I also always speak the truth. I'm a traveling musician and a storyteller by profession. So the way I'm doing my job is by podcast. During each episode, we'll be talking about a story from Indian mythology, followed by a character of the week segment.
A quick disclaimer before we begin today's show. There's cruelty to dogs in today's story. This episode is part 2 of Tenali Raman stories. It might be worth listening to the previous episode, but you don't have to. The story in this one stands alone. Some quick context setting if you haven't heard part 1. Tenali Raman is a court jester in the kingdom of Vijayanagaram, which is ruled by Krishnadeva Raya. The story is set in the 1500s. Most of the stories are about how Tenali Raman outwits the king, his fellow courtiers, or the priesthood, or all of them, somehow making lots of gold in the process. This week, we'll see Tenali Raman being cruel to a dog, and we will also see him invent the idea of fine print. Airlines across the whole world still follow this dirty trick he invented. The character this week is Bakasur, a demon who eats so much he can even give the people behind Man vs. Food some nightmares. You definitely don't want to take him to a restaurant with a buffet, as he'll probably finish all the food and eat all the other patrons and your ride home as well. King Krishnadeva Raya, whom I'm just going to call the king, was presiding over his court in the kingdom of Vijayanagaram. He had a royal dog, and the dog had just had puppies, 10 of them. Before you go awe, I must caution you. Instead of taking selfies with the cute little puppies and uploading them on social media, the king had a horrible idea when he noticed that none of the puppies had a straight tail. I don't understand the king's obsession with a straight tail. Why should the shape of the tail matter? But he was the king. So when he announced a tail straightening contest, people jumped at the chance. The contest winner was to get 100 gold coins. And that made people overlook how cute the puppies were. The puppies were distributed amongst the first 10 people to sign up. Tenali Raman was one of them. He habitually treated animals poorly and was always on the lookout for gold coins. So this was probably a dream come true for Raman. Many of the other volunteers tried humane methods to straighten their puppy's tail. One of them created a collar for his puppy's tail to nudge it into becoming straight over time. Another hired a very expensive masseur to massage their puppy's tail. A third person was a bit less nice. He tied a heavy stone to the puppy's tail to weigh it down and straighten it. The fourth person consulted a vet and got a prescription for some miracle drugs. The next person decided to leave it up to higher powers. He prayed to God in a temple. Someone else left their puppy alone, believing the tail would straighten itself over time. Yet another person decided that feeding the puppy would be the right thing to do. This last puppy got the royal treatment. The courtier spent a lot of money on the puppy, even at the expense of his own family. Raman didn't do any of that. He simply tied up the puppy and gave it barely enough food for it to survive. Now, this is a fictional story that doesn't make any sense, which is why Raman's puppy ended up with a straight tail. Starving a puppy is a terrible idea. Please don't do this. At the end of the contest, the king asked for and examined all 10 puppies, and he saw how Raman's was the only one with the straight tail. Raman's puppy was also the one that looked the most sickly, but that didn't seem to bother the king. Instead of punishing Raman, the king gave him 100 gold coins and praised him again. Seriously, what is wrong with this kingdom? This is why we have organizations like the SPCA and the PETA. Anyway, not long after, and to no one's surprise, Raman's puppy passed away. The priest called Raman out on that. Finally, someone seems to be showing some sense in this story. You starved the poor little puppy to death, they said to Raman. But it was soon clear that they had an ulterior motive. The priests claimed that their super spiritual enlightened state had allowed them to see what others hadn't seen. And what exactly is that? Asked Raman, the dog killer. Simple, they said. The puppy's ghost will wander the land restlessly, haunting everyone until it is appeased. In a completely unrelated coincidence, we priests are the only ones who can appease the ghost. Since Tenali had caused the dog's death, he has to pay us 100 gold coins for all the hard work involved. Tenali, who could sense a plot a mile away, was quick to spot one this time as well. He had an idea. I don't have any money on me right now, he said, but if you really insist, I can sell my very fine horse and give the money to you. The priest knew Tenali's horse was really a fine one. This was probably the same chicken wing eater from the last episode. They knew the horse was worth at least 100 gold coins, and so they readily agreed. But Raman pulled a cheap and dirty trick on them. And to this day, this trick has been a model for airlines all over the world when they offer deals. Raman put out a for sale sign and an ad to sell his horse, but added an asterisk and a footnote. Not long after, the priests, who hadn't paid much attention to the ad, saw Raman's horse being led away by its new owner. Eagerly looking forward to getting their gold, they immediately went to Raman and asked him to pay up. Raman said, "Of course, I'll be happy to pay you whatever the buyer paid me, minus administrative fees, taxes, title surcharges, and prorated insurance." When the priest started raising a stink about this, Raman said, "You know what? I'm feeling real generous today, and I like you guys. So I'm going to do you guys a huge favor. I'll waive all the fees." When he saw the priest breathe a collective sigh of relief, Raman added, "Besides, I can't really deduct any fees. What I got for that horse was just 1 copper coin, like just 1 cent. You can't really expect me to give you part of 1 cent, can you?" "1 copper coin? What are you talking about?" asked the priest. "The horse was worth at least 100 gold coins." "Oh, maybe you guys didn't get the memo," said Raman. "I sold the horse for 1 copper coin." "1 copper coin? Are you crazy?" the priest exclaimed. "Not really," said Raman. "But you see, you should have paid more attention to my ad and the fine print. The listed price was indeed a copper coin, but Raman had added a footnote. It said that to qualify for this incredible once-in-a-lifetime deal, the buyer also had to buy the horse's saddle for the trivial sum of 100 gold coins. 100 gold coins and 1 copper coin was still a pretty good deal for the horse and its saddle, so Raman was able to find a buyer quickly enough. The priests couldn't really complain. They'd agreed to only receive from Raman whatever money he got for the horse. So 1 copper coin is all they got. So the priest got tricked by Raman they were the losers in this story. The owner of the new horse got a fair price for the horse and he was happy. Raman was happy too. He managed to get out of a sticky situation with the priest. And he got a fair deal on his horse. Way more than he deserved. But I'm sure the horse was happiest of all. Seeing as how Raman treated his cat and his dog, I'm sure the horse would have leapt for joy at the news that he was being sold. That's it for that story. Since we are on the topic of animals, I thought I'd include one additional little snippet from the life, or as it happens, the death of Tenali Raman. For someone who spent a lifetime making money off of being cruel to animals, it's tragic but still somehow befitting that he died from an encounter with an animal. Raman was out walking one day and was suddenly bitten by a snake. He lay on the ground as the poison made its way through his veins. He asked a passerby to send an urgent message to the king, but the king ignored it, thinking this was another of Tenali Raman's tricks. In another version of the story, the king had died a few years before Raman, so in that version there's no mention of a message being sent. But given it's the 1500s, record keeping wasn't very exact then. Some notes on the stories. There are many parallels between Tenali Raman and the king and the stories of Akbar and Birbal. Birbal joined Akbar's court about 26 years after Tenali Raman's death. In Birbal's case, the setup is very similar, but the stories themselves are different and the reward often isn't 100 gold coins, but simply praise from the emperor. And Akbar definitely does not often praise Birbal for harming any animals. We'll definitely do several Akbar Birbal episodes later on in the podcast. While Tenali Raman is remembered for his wit and his stories, he was also a great poet and a polyglot. He was able to speak 8 different languages. It's a shame that he had to be such a jerk to animals. There is some artwork from Krishnadevaraya and the Vijayanagaram kingdom. I've linked some pictures of sculptures and paintings on my site sfipodcast.com if you want to have a look. The character this week is Bakasur. Bakasur is a giant demon who appears in the Mahabharata. His name has come to be synonymous with gluttony in much of India. Bakasur was a demon who terrorized a village near the cave where he lived, killing and eating indiscriminately. The villagers made a deal. They wanted to show a fixed loss on their portfolio instead of a floating one. They would send Bakasur a cartload of food every day if he could please just stop looting and killing them. So from that day on, Bakasur's diet consisted of an ox cart load of food, followed by the oxen and the cart driver for dessert. That is until he met Bhima, the mighty Pandav and possibly the strongest man in the world. But that's for another episode. Next week, we'll dive into some animal stories, where you'll find out how some basic physics knowledge can help you get a good meal, or maybe even save your life. The character next week is a warrior goddess who travels on a tiger and who can casually destroy any demon even with her hands tied behind her back. All 8 of them.
Since I'm several thousands of years old, my memory may be imperfect at times. So if you see any errors in my podcast, please point them out to me. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please leave a comment or a review on the site. It's sfipodcast.com. The site is also linked in the show notes, and the Twitter handle is @sfipodcast. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. I'd like to thank my family and friends. There are far too many to call out individually. Everyone has shown incredible support for this podcast, and I'm very grateful for that. See you next week.